Assalamu alaikum. In this lesson we will explain the last part of glycemia. At the end of this video you will be able to deduce the role of insulin, recognize the mode of action of insulin on a target cell, recognize the role of glucagon, and to recognize that some hormones of the body have hyperglycemic effect. Finally, to list the different types of diabetes. Previously, we've learned that the liver involves 3 reactions concerning glycemia, and these reactions must be regulated with the help of the pancreas, which is a mixed gland. The endocrine part of the pancreas is found in the islets of Langerhans, which are made up of 2 types of cells, the beta cells that secrete insulin and the alpha cells that secrete glucagon. Now, our last question for you is, what is the mode of action of each hormone? Which one is hypoglycemic and which one is hyperglycemic? Stay tuned, for this will be our last biology lesson for this year. In order to answer our posed question, we will perform an experiment. The objective of this experiment will be to determine the effect of insulin and glucagon on glycemia. In this experiment, we studied the variation of blood glucose in 2 dogs after the injection of insulin in a dog and glucagon in the other dog. Observe the following graph. What happened to the level of glycemia after injection of insulin? The level of glycemia decreased. Then insulin decreases glycemia, or the level of blood glucose. However, what happened after giving the dog an injection of glucagon? As you can see, glucagon increases glycemia. So the 2 hormones have opposite function concerning glycemia. Then we can also deduce that after a meal, when the blood glucose increases, the islets of Langerhans secrete insulin in order to decrease this extra glucose. However, when you need glucose, when there is a decrease in blood glucose, the islets of Langerhans secrete glucagon, in this case in order to increase the levels of glucose. But how? How does insulin work? Where is this glucose stored? What is exactly the mode of action of insulin? Well, insulin has an effect on many body cells. However, in our study, we will concentrate only on liver cells. The story of insulin starts after you take a meal rich in glucose. Your blood glucose directly increases above the normal value. This case is called hyperglycemia. Then the pancreas directly secretes insulin, which binds on specific receptors found on liver cells. The liver is then triggered in order to take the extra glucose in and transform them to glycogen. This reaction is known as glycogenesis. So in short, after hyperglycemia, beta cells secrete insulin. Insulin triggers liver cells by binding to specific receptors in order to undergo glycogenesis. What about the other hormone, glucagon, secreted by the pancreas? As we said previously, glucagon has the opposite function of insulin, where the alpha cell of pancreas secretes glucagon directly to the bloodstream in order to trigger the liver to undergo this time glycogenolysis, which in turn transforms glycogen back to glucose and sends them back to the bloodstream. I think that now the overall image is becoming more clear. In the case of hyperglycemia, beta cells of pancreas secrete insulin that triggers the liver to undergo glycogenesis. Oppositely, in the case of hypoglycemia, alpha cells of the pancreas secrete glucagon in order to trigger the liver to undergo glycogenolysis. I need you to concentrate and note here. Insulin decreases blood glucose. That's why it's called a hypoglycemic hormone. Hypo decreases glycemic blood glucose. On the contrary, glucagon increases blood glucose. That's why it's called a hyperglycemic hormone. Hyper increases glycemic blood glucose. However, did you know that there are other hormones that are considered hyperglycemic? Indeed, you have hormones such as thyroxine, adrenaline, cortisol, and growth hormone that increases the level of blood glucose. So all 4 hormones are also hyperglycemic hormones. We can give an example on the sugar rush you feel when you're excited from something. This is because adrenaline increases the levels of blood glucose. We can conclude from what we've previously said that regulating blood glucose is very important to get the necessary energy and stay healthy. This is done with the help of a hormone called insulin secreted by the pancreas. So if something wrong happens to the pancreas, our whole body will become ill without the necessary energy. One example is type 1 and type 2 diabetes. By definition, diabetes is a chronic long-lasting disorder diagnosed by having high blood glucose above the average value, which is 1 grams per liter. Normally, this extra glucose must be taken by liver cells because of a hormone called insulin. So what is the mistake that happened to get diabetes or an abnormal increase in glycemia? The problem must lie in insulin, where this disorder is related to the effectiveness of the insulin hormone. What is the difference between the two types of diabetes? Type 1 diabetes is caused by deficiency in insulin produced by beta cells. This type of diabetes is normally known as insulin-dependent diabetes. How? Well, you've learned that normally the beta cells of pancreas secrete insulin that binds to the target cell in order to trigger a certain response. However, in some cases, few or no beta cells are found, which leads to the decrease in the amount of insulin produced and thus a decrease in the uptake of glucose from blood. However, in another case, the shape of insulin produced is abnormal, where it's incompatible with the receptors of the target cell, and thus glucose remains in the blood. This type of diabetes can be simply cured by taking injections of insulin through the bloodstream. Type 2 diabetes is caused by few or no receptors on target cells. This type is an insulin-independent diabetes. The target cell here will have few or no receptors at all, so insulin can't bind to the target cell and thus no response is triggered. No glucose will be taken from the bloodstream. In this video, you've learned that the pancreas is involved in regulating blood glucose by secreting two opposite hormones. In the case of hyperglycemia, after a certain meal, insulin is secreted to bind to the liver and trigger glycogenesis, where the beta cells of the pancreas secrete insulin through the bloodstream, and then insulin binds to insulin receptors found on the target cell, in our study its liver cells, and thus the liver cells are triggered to take the extra glucose. The blood sugar will thus decrease. On the contrary, during hypoglycemia, as an example, after a certain exercise, glucagon triggers the liver to undergo glycogenolysis. Some hormones such as thyroxine, adrenaline, cortisol, and growth hormone have the same effect as glucagon. They are hyperglycemic hormones. They increase the levels of blood glucose. And finally, we've learned about a long-lasting disease, diabetes, which is a disorder diagnosed by having high blood glucose, where normally insulin must be secreted to trigger a certain response after binding to insulin receptors. However, in type 1 diabetes, which is insulin-dependent diabetes, the amount or the structure of insulin produced is abnormal. However, in type 2 diabetes, which is insulin-independent, the problem lies in the receptors found on the target cell. This video is prepared and recorded by teacher Zahra Shiri and supervised by teacher Ihsan Hassan. Thank you for your attention and hard work this year. Have a happy summer vacation.